Hello and welcome to The Spectator's View from 22 on SpectatorTV. I'm Sam Leith, the literary editor of The Spectator, and this week we're talking about what must be the biggest story of the week. A joint investigation by the Sunday Times and Channel 4's Dispatches has unearthed allegations that the comedian turned wellness guru, whatever that is, Russell Brand, is accused by 6 women of a range of sexual offences ranging from sexual assault to rape. Now, we don't know, of course, firsthand the truth or otherwise of these allegations. More is to come out on that. But I'm going to be talking to Andrew Neil, our chairman and the veteran broadcaster and journalist, about the reactions to this story breaking. So, Andrew, I've seen you spending quite a lot of time recently online taking on some of these people who've been leaping to Russell Brand's defence in what might look quite a hasty way. One of the lines they use, which on the face of it seems reasonable, is innocent until proven guilty. They're saying he's entitled to due process. What do you make of that?
Well, of course, he is innocent until proven guilty, but that's not the purpose of newspapers, to be judging and jurying this. There's an incredible amount of stupidity around about this. I mean, the kind of people who used to write to me in an analog age in green ink now are the people who have access to social media and an audience. And it's very depressing. Democracy is great. It gives everybody access, but it also reveals the stupidity that's out there. And of course, he's innocent until proved guilty. But newspapers, television, media are not judge and jury in such matters. It's the job of the police and the job of the courts to decide whether somebody is innocent or guilty, the job of a jury. What is an entirely legitimate job of newspapers and mainstream media is to investigate wrongdoing, to reveal, to expose, to put into the public domain. Whether that ends up being regarded as criminal behavior is a matter for the police and the courts. But it is perfectly legitimate, indeed, I would say a duty of mainstream media to put this sort of information into the public domain. And it wasn't done in a cavalier way. This was a 4-year investigation, kind of investigation that all this alternative media is neither the resources nor the expertise to do. And the idea that it's all a conspiracy against Russell Brand, I mean, frankly, most people couldn't give a monkeys about Russell Brand. But it is revealing of a kind of behavior that was tolerated by too many people at the time, including the BBC and Channel 4. So I think that this is the media, which often gets criticized, is actually done its job this time. It is up for others to decide if criminal charges should be laid against Mr. Brand, but I wouldn't be surprised if they are.
Do you think there's a danger that the media coverage will, as some are claiming, prejudice any criminal trial he might undergo?
Well, if you're going to say that any media coverage can prejudice a trial in advance, then we shouldn't write about anything. It's as simple as that. That if you're going to say that if you talk about people who have been involved in wrongdoing, if you expose people who may subsequently end up in court, that will pervert the course of justice. There is no role then for media doing proper investigative journalism. Again, I just think it's a nonsense. Juries are not stupid. Juries will make up their own mind should this come to a jury. The time will come for that. Indeed, I think people ought to remember this would have had no chance of ever coming to court or before a jury. And we still don't know if it will. But it certainly would have had no chance if it wasn't for the media in the first place. You know, a lot of people shouting at the mainstream media at the moment, complaining about it, are the very ones that criticize it when we don't do our job properly. Well, here we have responsible media acting responsibly, taking a long time to nail this story down, checking the testimonies, double-checking, going back and forward, spending a ton of money in doing this. This is not gossip or tittle-tattle. This is a proper investigation into someone who I think thought he was impregnable and above the normal constraints of behavior of most folk. And I think the story they have brought is compelling. And it's not ended there. This has opened the gates. There will be much more to this story to come, even as we talk. There are more women coming forward now. The dam has been broken. And it isn't just about Russell Brand. It is about those who were complicit in this sort of behavior, in those who cozied up to him in hoping that his celebrity would shine on them. Yes, Ed Miliband, I'm including you when you were leader of the Labour Party. And yes, Alistair Campbell, we're including you too. And senior managers of the BBC and some people at Endemol, the production company for Big Brother. There's a lot more people in this story that is yet to come out. And I suppose what it tells us most of all, in addition to a story of inappropriate behavior so bad that in some cases it may well have been criminal, it's also a story about the corrosive power of celebrity in our culture.
Yeah. Now, there's another aspect which you've touched on to these complaints, which is not the sort of legalistic, innocent until proven guilty one. It's the more conspiratorial and speculative one that says not only why now, but look at the motivations that we suppose those that they say it's the mainstream media, it's a coordinated hit job, and this is the defence line that Russell Brand took and that's been very widely taken up. Why has that got such traction? And is there any virtue to it?
There's no virtue to it at all. And the people who are pushing this line that there's a kind of conspiracy to do it down are the very people who believe in all sorts of conspiracies as well, that vaccinations put little microchips into our bodies, and that the Bush administration was really behind 9/11 and all the other nonsense. And of course, naturally, we live in a world run by lizard people. We all know who they are. The mainstream media knows who they are. We're just too frightened to point out the lizards among us. So they're conspiracists on everything now.
But they're quite
and that's why they bring it out. And it's a kind of a defense is quite hard to deal with because it is so ludicrous. And it's a defense that doesn't need facts. It's a culture in which Russell Brand himself lived and profited, or at least until YouTube have pulled the plug on his revenues. And so that's what they deal in. They don't deal in the gathering of evidence. You know, it's much more like a Donald Trump world, where it doesn't matter the evidence you put to Mr. Trump, he still just bats it back as conspiracy. And I think it's a very dangerous world that we're in. We're in danger of leaving an evidence-based world. I remember years ago when I was a young journalist at The Economist, which is basically an opinion magazine. I remember the editor saying to me, Andrew, facts are cheap, facts are expensive, opinions are cheap. In other words, we can all have opinions, and all these conspiracy theorists can have their absurd opinions about what's really going on here with Russell Brand. But to establish what's going on, to produce the evidence, takes investigative journalism, time, money, resource. That's expensive. There's not enough of it. The Sunday Times and Channel 4 have done us a favor by doing this, as they've done in many other areas too. And we need more of this. The idea, in particular, first of all, the Murdoch organization, which owns the Sunday Times, what do they care about Russell Brand? It's of no importance to them at all. And take Channel 4. What possible conspiracy motive could Channel 4 have for doing this, given that it puts Channel 4 in the frame? I mean, a lot of this was going on when he was working for Channel 4, when he was the big figure in Channel 4. A lot of senior executives in Channel 4, at least who were at that time, plus the production companies that they hired to make these programs, they've got a lot of questions to answer. I mean, to be a real conspiracy theorist in this case, you have to assume that Channel 4 is a conspiracy against itself. Even for conspiracy theorists.
How deep does the rabbit hole go?
But that's a bit of a stretch.
A question, though. I mean, you talk about these people as conspiracy theories, the lizard people. I mean, very obviously, a number of the people who have leapt to Brand's defense, taking exactly this line, they may be conspiracy theorists, but they're very, very prominent and influential people. We're looking at Jordan Peterson, who's widely claimed to be a public intellectual, Elon Musk, who's one of the most powerful men in the world. I mean, it's not a kind of marginal fringe of people sitting in their basements wearing tinfoil hats. These people are quite powerful. Is that a shift in our world?
I think it is a shift, and I'm surprised by some of the names. And of course, social media and certain television outlets can give them a voice that they wouldn't have had so much before, because this kind of nonsense wouldn't have passed the test of broadcasting or publishing in media that actually has some standards as to what we publish and what we don't. But I am quite surprised that people have rushed to his defense. Because even without this investigation, this is clearly not a nice guy. He's not a decent person. Even if he's done nothing criminal, and that, of course, is still to be established, he's clearly a bit of a scumbag in his behavior, his treatment of women, and his general attitude. I thought what was most revealing in the Dispatches Channel 4 documentary wasn't actually the investigative journalism, good as it was, and the testimony of the women, harrowing as it was. I think it was the clips of Russell Brand's own performances as a stand-up comedian on television. Some of the things he was saying, the fact that he was clearly not at all funny. He was just rude and crude, vulgar, talentless. And I think one of the things it tells us about our culture, we do have a habit, and I'm sure it happens everywhere, but it's a particularly British phenomenon. We have an ability to elevate people of no talent whatsoever, of zero talent, indeed of pretty seedy, dodgy people, to become national icons, or even in some cases, national treasures. I wouldn't put Russell Brand in that category. I give you his Exhibit A, Jimmy Savile. A man of zero talent whatsoever, a man of no abilities whatsoever when it came to entertainment. And yet, such a national figure that he becomes. He's knighted, I think, by Margaret Thatcher, and King, then Prince Charles, Doak Solomon calls for advice on his marriage, and all the rest of it. And there is Russell Brand, the leader of the Labour Party, trying to win the election in 2015, going to his studio to be interviewed. We elevate these people, and beyond anything they deserve in terms of their talent or their contribution to society. And there's always a bunch of people around ready to cheerlead them. And I think, Sam, when you take someone like a Jordan Peterson or the woman who I saw arguing with Andrew Pierce on GB News, I think because Russell Brand's position in terms of a variety of conspiracies is very similar to their conspiracies, they regard him as he's one of us. So regardless of what he's being accused of, we need to rally behind him. We need to get behind him. They're trying to pick us off. I mean, don't forget, they're conspiracy theorists, so therefore they are paranoid. I mean, no, they're not just paranoid. They do know most sensible people are against them. And I think it's a kind of rallying defense to look after one of their own.
It's odd, isn't it, that conspiratorial mindset, that he's one of us, seems to kind of gallop across traditional ideological divides, doesn't it? I mean, we see kind of George Galloway and Tucker Carlson, I don't think, have very much in common in their politics at all. But they were both, their instant reaction was, it's a hit job, it's the mainstream media protecting itself. Is that the new divide in our politics?
Well, I think it bears out what I was doing when I was a wee lad, a wee student doing political science, along with political economy at the University of Glasgow. I remember in political science, my professor saying that the left-right is not a straight line going in opposite directions. It's actually a circle in which the hard left and the hard right meet each other. And they stand for so many things together. And you see that in so many places. I mean, if you take Le Pen and the National Front in France, a lot of her economic policies are not dissimilar from the hard left in terms of state intervention, massive minimum wages, control of big industry, and so on. And I mean, I was recently on American television arguing with somebody from the American radical right. They were against the war in Ukraine, using all the same arguments that Jeremy Corbyn would use in the United Kingdom. And if you look now, the people who are against us standing up for freedom and the people of Ukraine and helping them and seeing off this revanchist, aggressive Russia, they are now from the hard left and the hard right, and they both say the same things. And I think it's quite interesting now, in the case of Russell Brand and those who support him, you do see a merging of the hard right and the hard left saying the same thing, standing for the same things now, basically united in opposition to what I would call liberal democracy. And, it leads them into dark ways and strange paths, in which someone like President Putin becomes a hero. And I think when you see that happening, both on the far right and the far left, and by the way, the problem is today they're not that far. I mean, they have voices in the mainstream. They're not just completely sidelined. They are able to get access and spread their poison among lots of people. When you see that sort of thing happening, we're in a dangerous world. And I fear at the moment liberal democracy is in quite a weak position to see this. And it's why the Russell Brand story is a bigger narrative than just this. I mean, we are now into the third decade of the 21st century. This was meant to be the decade of the triumph of democracy, whereas in fact, for over 2 decades, we've had the triumph of authoritarianism, and in some cases, totalitarianism. And liberal democracy has been on the defensive, both at home and abroad. The AfD in Germany, the hard right in Italy, Le Pen in France, Donald Trump's Proud Boys and right wing in America. We see that as well as the rise of President Xi's China and Mr. Putin's Russia. These are dangerous times. People like Russell Brand are no friend of liberal democracy, neither are his supporters. We're going to need to get our act together and make sure that they don't make any further advances.
And what do you think has caused, as you say, we've got a rise in illiberal reflexes, a rise in mistrust for the traditional canons of, mainstream authority. What is it that's broken us in that way that everything divides along cultural war lines? Is it Brexit? Is it the pandemic? Is it the rise of Trump? Where did this all kick off?
I think the real time it kicked off was the great crash of 2008 and the aftermath of that. The great crash of 2008 was a systemic failure of free markets and capitalism. And the consequences have been quite horrific. We've had, and by we, I mean the Western world, outside America, we've had very little economic growth. Real wages for workers have stagnated. If you had assets, if you had wealth, quantitative easing, the printing of money, electronic printing money, you've done pretty well. You own a house in London, you own stocks and shares and all the rest of it. You've seen your wealth rise. You're a worker in a factory in the Midlands or in Pittsburgh. You've not done well. Your real wages are no higher than they were in 2007. And I think that has helped to create a feeling that the people who caused the crash, who were the capitalists, have done pretty well since. They've not suffered, despite their absurd behavior. And the people who are entirely innocent of the crash are the ones who suffered most and who don't see them getting on and fear that for the first time their children will have less of a decent life than they had. I mean, until now, parents always assumed that their kids would by and large do better than them and have a higher standard of living and more opportunities. That was certainly true of my parents. Always assumed that me and my brother would have far better opportunities than they ever had. And they were right. That's not true anymore. And I think that sense of austerity, of the people who didn't causing the crash, suffering the most, and those who did, getting off scot-free, essentially. How many even went to jail in the end? I think 0 is about the answer of that. I think that's opened the doors to a populism of the left and of the right. And it gave you Donald Trump, and it gave you Brexit as well, and it's given you Russell Brand's nonsense and all the other things. It's a dangerous time. And we're not at the end of that yet because real wages are still not rising. And we've seen a shift in GDP from labor to capital. And until we begin to see a move back so that labor has its time in the sun, let's say this with a small L, labor has its time in the sun, then I think you're going to see these trends of these forces continue to grow in power. I saw somewhere, Sam, and I think there are about half a dozen countries now where a far-right party is getting at least 20% in the polls. Even in democracies as solid and sensible and moderate as Sweden. The Sweden Democrats, or the Social Democrats, the Sweden Democrats are now effectively in government. And when you add migration or mass migration into that mix, I think that has been a potent brew at a time when people's wages were already struggling to stay in real terms. They saw all these other people coming in and think, hey, that's going to make it even more difficult for me. Whether that's right or wrong is another matter, but that's what people felt. And that's what's created what has been quite a toxic brew. What I don't yet know the answer to, Sam, is why was it in the end the populace right that benefited from that rather than the populace left? I think I'll leave that to whoever succeeded the old political science professor that I referred to answer my question.
Well, we'll look forward to it. Andrew Neil, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.